Beyond the spiral arms of the Andromeda sector, where three suns cast perpetual twilight across floating education platforms, stood the most prestigious hunting institution in known space. Here, young predators from countless worlds gathered to perfect the ancient art of never blinking, never resting, never showing the slightest hint of weakness that might suggest they belonged anywhere other than the top of their respective food chains. Instructor Blaze surveyed his classroom with the satisfied air of a creature who had personally devoured at least half the species represented in textbooks. His scaled hide gleamed under the harsh training lights, and when he smiled, rows of serrated teeth caught the illumination like a very unfriendly chandelier. Today's lesson focused on what he considered the most fundamental principle of predator superiority: the absolute rejection of sleep during active hunts. "Listen well, cubs," Blaze announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested disagreement might result in becoming a very educational snack. Throughout the cosmos, inferior species require rest. They curl up, they close their eyes, they become vulnerable. We do not. The assembled students nodded with the enthusiasm of youth convinced they had unlocked the universe's greatest secrets. Nexus, whose compound eyes never seemed to stop analyzing everything simultaneously, clicked her mandibles in agreement. Her species famously stayed awake for lunar cycles, processing information through multiple consciousness streams that made sleep not just unnecessary, but genuinely impossible. "My people hunt across gas giant storms for months without pause," declared Orion, his crystalline form refracting the classroom lights into tiny rainbows that danced across nearby surfaces. "Sleep is for carbon-based weaklings." Echo's energy form pulsed with what might have been amusement or perhaps just electromagnetic interference. "Physical rest concepts do not apply to beings of pure consciousness. We exist beyond such primitive limitations." The students continued their enthusiastic one-upmanship until a distinctly unimpressed yawn echoed from the back corner. Every head turned toward the source, a human exchange student who appeared to be examining his fingernails with the kind of casual attention usually reserved for mildly interesting weather patterns. Alex looked up from his nail inspection with the expression of someone who had just realized the entire class was staring at him. He blinked once, slowly, as if the concept of surprise required considerable processing time. "Problem?" he asked, in the tone of someone genuinely curious whether he had missed something important, like a fire alarm or perhaps an invasion. Blaze's smile widened, revealing even more teeth than seemed structurally necessary. "Ah yes, our human guest. Perhaps you would like to contribute to our discussion about predator endurance?" The cubs leaned forward with barely contained glee. Everyone knew humans represented the galaxy's most obvious example of prey, species evolution gone wrong. Soft skin, blunt teeth, eyes positioned for peripheral vision rather than focused hunting, and worst of all, an embarrassing biological requirement for daily unconsciousness that lasted approximately 1/3 of their planetary rotation cycles. Alex appeared to consider the question with the same thoughtful attention he had devoted to his fingernails. Then he reached into his bag and withdrew what could only be described as a rectangular collection of pressed plant fibers bound together with primitive, adhesive technology. "Well," Alex said, turning the object over in his hands, "I suppose that depends on how you define endurance." Nexus's mandibles clicked with what might have been laughter. "Humans sleep 8 hours every single day. Your species literally becomes unconscious and defenseless on a regular schedule. How could you possibly understand predator endurance? My people conquered 3 star systems without sleeping once during the campaigns," Orion added, his crystalline structure brightening with pride. "We are living proof that superior species transcend such weaknesses." Alex nodded thoughtfully, as if these were fascinating new concepts he had never encountered before. He opened the book to a random page and appeared to read a few lines with the kind of mild interest usually reserved for ingredient lists on processed food containers. "That's very impressive," Alex said, and somehow managed to sound like he genuinely meant it. "I bet you never had to worry about anyone catching you off guard." "Exactly," Blaze interjected, his instructor instincts recognizing a perfect teaching moment. The moment a predator closes its eyes, it becomes prey. This is fundamental to understanding our place in the galactic hierarchy. Makes perfect sense, Alex agreed, turning another page. I can see why you would want to avoid that kind of vulnerability. Echo's energy form pulsed brighter. Finally, the human understands basic predator principles. Perhaps there is hope for prey species education after all. The cubs erupted in what passed for laughter among their respective species, creating a cacophony of clicks, crystalline chimes, and electromagnetic static that would have made any sensible noise ordinance enforcement officer reach for stronger medications. Alex continued reading his book with the kind of peaceful concentration that suggested either profound wisdom or complete obliviousness to the mockery surrounding him. The cubs gradually realized their laughter was being met with absolutely no reaction whatsoever, which somehow made their amusement feel less satisfying than anticipated. Blaze cleared his throat, a sound that resembled rocks tumbling down a mountain made entirely of broken glass. Perhaps our human friend would like to demonstrate his species' hunting capabilities. We have simulation chambers, designed for prey species observation. Oh, that sounds interesting, Alex said, finally looking up from his book. Though I should probably mention something first. The entire classroom fell silent with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for dramatic revelations or impending natural disasters. Alex closed the book carefully, marking his place with what appeared to be a small strip of pressed plant fiber. Where I come from, we have this saying about assumptions making people look foolish. Something about assuming and consequences that affect both parties involved. He stood up slowly, stretching with the casual ease of someone who had just spent a pleasant afternoon reading in a comfortable chair, rather than sitting through what amounted to an advanced course in species-based intimidation. I think, Alex said, his tone carrying just the slightest hint of something that might have been amusement, you might be surprised by what humans consider endurance. The silence that followed Alex's statement stretched across the classroom like a particularly awkward family dinner where someone had just announced their intention to join a traveling circus. Blaze's scaled features arranged themselves into what might charitably be called a smile, though it bore an unfortunate resemblance to the expression predators wore just before demonstrating why they occupied the top of food chains. Surprised, Blaze repeated, his voice carrying the kind of dangerous curiosity that suggested Alex had just volunteered for something considerably more challenging than a pop quiz. Human, your species requires unconsciousness for approximately 8 hours out of every rotation cycle. What possible surprises could you offer regarding endurance? Nexus clicked her mandibles in a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like snickering. Perhaps he means humans are surprisingly good at finding comfortable places to sleep. The cubs erupted into another round of species-specific laughter, creating an audio landscape that resembled a malfunctioning communications array attempting to contact 17 different civilizations simultaneously. Alex weathered this storm of amusement with the serene patience of someone watching clouds drift across a peaceful sky. Actually, Alex said, once the cacophony subsided to merely deafening levels, I was thinking more along the lines of a practical demonstration. Echo's energy form flickered with what might have been interest or possibly just seasonal electromagnetic fluctuations. What kind of demonstration could a prey species possibly offer that would impress predators? Alex opened his book again, scanning the pages with the kind of casual attention that suggested he was looking for something specific, but not particularly urgent. Well, you all seem pretty confident about this whole never sleeping during hunts thing. How about we put that confidence to the test? Orion's crystalline structure brightened considerably, casting rainbow patterns across the ceiling that would have been quite beautiful under different circumstances. Are you challenging us, human? A prey species challenging predators? I suppose I am, Alex replied, turning another page. Unless, of course, you are not as confident as you sound. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, though this might have been due to the sudden collective intake of breath from every student present. In predator society, Questioning someone's confidence ranked somewhere between declaring their mother ugly and suggesting their hunting techniques needed improvement. Blaze's smile widened to reveal what appeared to be an entirely unreasonable number of teeth. Very well, human. You have issued a formal challenge. According to Academy protocols, we must now establish parameters for what you have so foolishly initiated. Within moments, news of the challenge had spread through the Academy's communication networks with the kind of speed usually associated with wildfire or particularly juicy gossip. Faculty members began materializing in the classroom as if summoned by some invisible signal that only predators could detect. Pulse, a faculty member whose species resembled what might happen if someone crossed a panther with a small nebula, flowed into the room with liquid grace. Did someone say challenge? Between species? Oh, this should be educational. Halo arrived next, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with excitement. I have not witnessed an interspecies endurance challenge since the Crater Moon incident. This promises to be either highly entertaining or completely tragic. Possibly both, added Flux, whose mechanical enhancements clicked and whirred as she processed the situation. Academy insurance protocols require me to document everything for potential liability claims. News of the challenge reached the Academy's administrative levels with the kind of efficiency that suggested someone had activated emergency notification systems. Headmaster Cosmos materialized in the classroom using what appeared to be a personal teleportation device that probably cost more than most planetary defense budgets. Cosmos surveyed the scene with the expression of someone who had just discovered his quiet afternoon was about to become significantly more complicated. Instructor Blaze, please explain why my communication systems are reporting an interspecies challenge involving our human exchange student. The human has questioned predator endurance capabilities, Blaze explained, his tone suggesting this represented a fundamental challenge to the natural order of the universe. Academy protocols require formal testing to resolve such disputes. I see, Cosmos said, though his expression suggested he saw considerably more than he wanted to. And what specific form will this testing take? Echo's energy form pulsed brighter. Hunt endurance contest, whoever maintains consciousness longest, while performing active hunting simulations wins. Standard isolation chamber protocols, Nexus added, her compound eyes reflecting light in patterns that suggested barely contained excitement. No external stimulants, no communication, no rest periods. Continuous hunting simulation scenarios every hour, Orion contributed, his crystalline structure practically vibrating with anticipation. Miss 3 consecutive simulations and automatic disqualification occurs. Alex looked up from his book with the expression of someone who had just been invited to participate in a particularly interesting science experiment. That sounds reasonable, though I should probably ask about the rules regarding reading material. The collective pause that followed this question lasted approximately long enough for several small civilizations to rise and fall. Reading material during endurance challenges ranked somewhere between bringing a pillow and requesting background music, on the scale of things predators considered reasonable. Reading material? Pulse repeated, her nebular form shifting colors in what might have been confusion or possibly amusement. Just this book, Alex said, holding up the rectangular plant fiber collection. Nothing electronic, no external information sources. Just something to keep my mind occupied during the quiet moments. Halo's bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly as he processed this request. You want to read during an endurance challenge designed to test hunting capabilities? Well, Alex said, I figure there might be some downtime between simulations. Seems like a waste to just sit there staring at walls. The faculty members exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing something unprecedented in Academy history. Cosmos cleared his throat with the kind of authoritative sound that indicated important decisions were being made. Very well, he announced. Standard hunt endurance contest protocols will apply. One book will be permitted as reading material, provided it contains no electronic components or external communication capabilities. The cubs practically vibrated with excitement as betting pools began forming among faculty members. Alex closed his book carefully and smiled with the kind of peaceful confidence that suggested he knew something nobody else had figured out yet. The Academy's isolation chambers resembled what might happen if someone crossed a meditation retreat with a maximum security prison, and then added enough monitoring equipment to satisfy an entire civilization of paranoid surveillance enthusiasts. Each chamber contained nothing more than basic life support systems, a single chair that had apparently been designed by someone with a profound misunderstanding of anatomy, and enough sensors to detect if an occupant so much as considered thinking about napping. Alex settled into his assigned chamber with the casual ease of someone claiming their favorite spot in a library, reading room. He opened his book to the first page and began reading with the kind of focused attention that suggested he had all the time in the universe and intended to use every moment of it productively. The cubs had entered their respective chambers with considerably more fanfare. Nexus performed an elaborate ritual involving clicking patterns that supposedly enhanced her species' natural alertness abilities. Orion spent several minutes adjusting his crystalline structure to optimize light absorption for sustained consciousness. Echo engaged in what appeared to be some form of energy meditation that made the chamber's monitoring equipment emit concerned beeping sounds. Blaze occupied the instructor observation chamber, where he could monitor all participants while providing commentary that managed to be both educational and vaguely threatening. Hour 1 begins now. Remember, cubs, this is about more than personal pride. You represent the pinnacle of predator evolution. The first 24 hours proceeded exactly as everyone except Alex had predicted. The cubs maintained their consciousness with the kind of aggressive determination usually associated with small animals defending territory from much larger animals. They completed their hourly hunting simulations with impressive efficiency, stalking virtual prey through digital environments that would have challenged experienced hunters from any species. Alex continued reading his book, occasionally pausing to complete his simulations with what appeared to be casual competence rather than predatory excellence. His approach to virtual hunting resembled someone following directions from a manual rather than channeling millions of years of evolutionary programming. Human performance remains adequate, Blaze announced during hour 18, his tone suggesting this represented a significant disappointment in the natural order. Though his hunting technique lacks the instinctive aggression we expect from true predators. Perhaps that explains why his species requires so much sleep, Nexus called through her chamber's communication system, her mandibles clicking with amusement. Constant consciousness demands energy that prey species simply cannot sustain. Hour 30 marked the first signs of what Academy instructors politely called cognitive efficiency reduction. Orion's crystalline structure began displaying subtle color fluctuations that indicated his consciousness was working harder to maintain optimal performance levels. The changes were barely perceptible, but monitoring equipment designed to detect such variations registered the shift immediately. Orion shows minimal degradation, Blaze reported, though his tone suggested this represented the beginning of something more significant. Still within acceptable predator parameters. Alex turned another page of his book, paused to complete his hunting simulation with the same methodical approach he had maintained since the beginning, then returned to reading with undiminished focus. If the monitoring equipment was detecting any degradation in his performance, it was keeping that information to itself. By hour 40, the situation had evolved from educational demonstration to concerning development that required closer observation. Nexus began missing peripheral targets in her hunting simulations, her compound eyes apparently having difficulty processing multiple data streams simultaneously. Her clicking patterns became irregular, lacking the precise rhythms that characterized her species' optimal consciousness states. Nexus experiencing standard endurance fatigue, Blaze announced, though his voice carried undertones that suggested this development was occurring sooner than anticipated. Her performance remains within acceptable ranges for extended operations. Echo's energy form began displaying what could only be described as flickering, like a light source experiencing power fluctuations. The phenomenon was subtle enough that casual observation might miss it entirely, but Academy sensors registered every variation in electromagnetic output. Alex completed his 40th simulation, stretched briefly in his chair, and returned to his book as if the previous 40 hours had been nothing more than a pleasant afternoon reading session. His vital signs remained remarkably stable, showing none of the stress indicators that typically accompanied extended consciousness maintenance. Hour 50 brought developments that transformed faculty betting pools from confident wagers to nervous calculations. Orion's color fluctuations intensified, his crystalline structure displaying patterns that indicated significant consciousness strain. Echo's flickering became more pronounced, energy output varying in ways that suggested his consciousness was working considerably harder to maintain coherence. Participants showing expected endurance stress, Blaze reported, though his tone had shifted from confident instruction to careful observation. All performance levels remain within acceptable predator parameters. Nexus completed her 50th simulation with noticeable difficulty, her targeting accuracy dropping to levels that would have concerned her instructors under normal circumstances. Her communication attempts became less frequent, compound eyes focusing with the kind of intense concentration that suggested maintaining awareness required increasing effort. Alex turned another page of his book, completed his simulation with the same methodical competence he had demonstrated throughout the challenge, and resumed reading without any apparent indication that 50 hours of continuous consciousness represented anything more challenging than waiting for public transportation. Hour 60 arrived with the kind of dramatic timing usually associated with carefully scripted entertainment rather than scientific observation. Orion's crystalline structure began displaying rapid color, changes that indicated severe consciousness strain, his form brightening and dimming in patterns that resembled emergency warning signals. Orion, approaching critical thresholds, Blaze announced, his voice carrying the kind of concerned authority that suggested the situation had moved beyond simple educational demonstration. Recommend consideration of voluntary withdrawal. Never, Orion managed through his communication system, though his voice carried distortions that indicated significant effort was required for basic communication. Predator pride demands endurance beyond prey species limitations. Echo's energy form began fluctuating more dramatically, periods of brightness alternating with moments of near transparency that suggested his consciousness was struggling to maintain coherent existence. The monitoring equipment registered electromagnetic variations that indicated critical stress levels. Alex completed his 60th simulation, paused to mark his place in the book with the same small strip of pressed plant fiber he had used throughout the challenge, and then returned to reading with the kind of peaceful focus that suggested the previous 60 hours had been exactly as relaxing as they appeared. Hour 65 brought the first capitulation. Orion's crystalline structure suddenly dimmed to barely perceptible levels, his consciousness finally overwhelmed by the sustained effort required for continuous awareness. Academy medical protocols activated automatically, emergency systems flooding his chamber with restoration frequencies designed to stabilize crystalline consciousness patterns. Orion has exceeded safe endurance limits, Blaze announced, his voice now carrying undertones of genuine concern rather than educational pride. Emergency restoration protocols active. Echo lasted exactly 13 more minutes before his energy form began dispersing in ways that indicated imminent consciousness collapse. Academy containment systems activated to prevent complete energy dissipation. Medical staff mobilizing to provide emergency stabilization procedures. Echo withdrawal confirmed, Blaze reported, though his attention had clearly shifted from instruction to medical supervision. 2 participants remaining. Nexus and Alex continued their respective approaches to the challenge, though only one of them appeared to be experiencing any actual challenge whatsoever. Hour 70 marked what Academy historians would later describe as the moment when established predator theory encountered an immovable object disguised as a human with a book. Nexus maintained her position through sheer stubborn determination, her compound eyes now focusing with the kind of desperate intensity usually associated with prey animals realizing they had wandered into significantly more dangerous territory than anticipated. Alex turned another page of his book, completed his simulation with the same methodical approach that had characterized his performance since the beginning, and returned to reading as if the previous 70 hours represented nothing more than a particularly long commute. Nexus displaying significant consciousness strain, Blaze reported, his voice now carrying the kind of careful neutrality that suggested his worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable revision. Human performance remains consistent. The word consistent hung in the air like a diplomatic euphemism for something considerably more disturbing. Faculty members who had initially gathered to witness an entertaining demonstration of predator superiority now observed with the focused attention usually reserved for phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. Pulse flowed closer to the observation monitors, her nebular form shifting through color spectrums that indicated deep contemplation mixed with growing concern. His vital signs show no degradation whatsoever. How is this possible for a prey species? Halo's bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that suggested his understanding of galactic hierarchies was experiencing significant system errors. 70 hours of continuous consciousness should be impossible for humans. Their biology requires regular unconsciousness cycles. Perhaps our information about human physiology is incomplete, Cosmos suggested, though his tone indicated this possibility ranked somewhere between uncomfortable and catastrophic on his scale of preferred explanations. Hour 72 arrived with the inevitability of a natural disaster that everyone could see coming but nobody could prevent. Nexus attempted her simulation with the kind of determined focus that suggested she was operating on willpower rather than actual consciousness. Her targeting accuracy had degraded to levels that would have resulted in starvation for any real predator attempting actual hunting. Her compound eyes began displaying erratic movement patterns, processing multiple data streams with increasing difficulty. The clicking sounds that characterized her species' communication became irregular, then sporadic, then ceased entirely as she focused every available resource on maintaining basic awareness. Nexus approaching critical consciousness failure, Blaze announced, his voice now stripped of any pretense that this situation represented normal educational parameters. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Cannot withdraw, Nexus managed through her communication system, though her voice carried the kind of desperate determination usually associated with last stands against impossible odds. Predator, pride, demands. Her communication cut off mid-sentence as her consciousness finally succumbed to 72 hours of sustained effort. Academy medical systems activated immediately, flooding her chamber with species-specific restoration compounds designed to prevent permanent consciousness damage. Nexus withdrawal confirmed, Blaze reported, though his attention had shifted entirely from instruction to medical supervision. One participant remaining. The observation chamber fell silent except for the steady humming of monitoring equipment and the occasional page-turning sound from Alex's chamber. Every faculty member present found themselves confronting the profoundly disturbing possibility that their fundamental understanding of predator-prey relationships might require significant revision. Alex completed his 70-second simulation, stretched briefly in his chair, and returned to his book with the kind of peaceful satisfaction that suggested he was approaching an interesting plot development. His vital signs remained as stable as they had been at the beginning of the challenge, showing no indication that maintaining consciousness for 72 consecutive hours represented anything more challenging than routine daily activities. Cosmos cleared his throat with the kind of authoritative sound that indicated important decisions were being made under unprecedented circumstances. Human Alex, you have successfully outlasted all other participants. Academy protocols declare you the winner of this endurance challenge. Alex looked up from his book with the expression of someone who had just been informed that his quiet reading session had unexpectedly turned into a formal competition. Oh, is it over already? I was just getting to the good part. The collective silence that followed this statement lasted approximately long enough for several faculty members to question their career choices, and at least one to consider early retirement. Alex closed his book carefully, marking his place with the same plant fiber strip he had used throughout the challenge. "How?" Blaze asked, his voice carrying the kind of desperate curiosity usually associated with predators who had just discovered their prey was considerably more dangerous than anticipated. "How did you maintain consciousness for 72 hours without any degradation whatsoever?" Alex stood up slowly, stretching with the casual ease of someone who had spent a pleasant weekend reading, rather than participating in what was supposed to be an impossible endurance challenge. "Well, that is an interesting question." He walked to the chamber's observation window, where every faculty member and recovered student was staring at him with expressions ranging from bewilderment to existential crisis. "You see, where I come from, we learned something a long time ago about hunting endurance. What could humans possibly know about hunting that predator species have not perfected?" Pulse asked, her nebular form shifting through colors that indicated profound confusion. "We learned that the best hunters are not the ones who never sleep," Alex explained, his tone carrying the patient quality of someone explaining obvious concepts to particularly slow students. "The best hunters are the ones who know how to sleep while remaining alert." Echo, who had recovered enough consciousness to communicate through the Academy's energy interface systems, pulsed with what might have been confusion. "That makes no sense. Sleep means unconsciousness. Unconsciousness means vulnerability." "Not exactly," Alex said, opening his book to a random page. "You see, human hunters developed something we call micro-sleeping, brief periods of partial consciousness reduction that provide rest without complete awareness loss. Orion, his crystalline structure still dim but functional, managed to project his voice through the communication system. Impossible. Consciousness cannot be partially reduced while maintaining alertness." "Actually, it can," Alex continued, his voice carrying the kind of patient authority usually associated with experienced teachers addressing particularly stubborn misconceptions. "While you were all fighting to stay completely conscious for 72 hours, I was taking hundreds of tiny rest periods. A few seconds here, a few seconds there, while appearing to read." "The book," Nexus realized, her mandibles clicking weakly as consciousness gradually returned. The book was not reading material. It was a focusing tool. Alex smiled with the kind of genuine appreciation usually reserved for students who had just grasped particularly difficult concepts. "Exactly. The book provided a familiar focal point that allowed me to control my consciousness states. While you were burning through your awareness like fuel in an engine, I was managing mine like a renewable resource." The implications of this revelation rippled through the observation chamber like a particularly uncomfortable truth, spreading through a population that had built their entire identity around avoiding such truths. Every predator species represented in the Academy had developed hunting techniques based on the assumption that consciousness was an all-or-nothing proposition. Cosmos stepped forward with the expression of someone who had just realized that his educational institution might need to revise several centuries' worth of curriculum. "Are you suggesting that human hunting techniques are superior to established predator methodologies?" "I would not say superior," Alex replied, closing his book with the kind of finality that suggested important lessons were concluding. "I would say different. You developed techniques for species that never needed to conserve consciousness. We developed techniques for species that had to." He looked around the observation chamber, meeting the gaze of every faculty member and student present. "Which approach do you think produces better long-term hunters?" The question hung in the air like a philosophical bomb that had just detonated in the middle of everything they thought they knew about predator superiority. Somewhere in the distance, betting pools were being quietly dissolved as faculty members reconsidered their understanding of which species actually occupied the top of the galactic food chain.